Welcome to Mystery Con. I hope you're all doing well and staying sharp. They deleted the evidence, but the stories leaked. 8 dark, thrilled conspiracies that vanished test subjects, erased memories, buried science. It feels too real to ignore. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. The Lazarus Project didn't exist until it showed up under my login. I was halfway through another shift at the National Biomedical Registry, nursing cold coffee and the faint hope that one day the system might crash permanently, when a trial entry flagged red on my dashboard. No metadata, no associated PDF, just a title. LZR 1994-7. I clicked it out of boredom more than interest. The database spit back a 404 entry corrupted, but not before flashing a title too quickly for the filters to catch. Project Lazarus, Subject Viability Review. I blinked. Lazarus. That wasn't just a name you gave to medical trials. That was folklore, biotech mythology, rumors whispered in fringe forums, alluding to military-funded regeneration research shut down for ethics violations. I should have dismissed it. Probably a corrupted legacy file mistagged from an old military archive. But I copied the trial ID anyway. That night, after most of the team had logged off, I ran a batch script comparing LZR 1994-07 to every pharmaceutical patent filed in the last 15 years. It was dumb. A data ghost chasing shadows, but the results, they didn't make sense. 5 different companies, all leaders in biotech, showed sudden, unexplained revenue spikes in Q4s following research losses, not gains, losses, teams gone, dark, lead researchers reassigned and then never seen again. No LinkedIns, no conference panels, they vanished, and each time a new therapy would quietly clear approval. No fanfare, no press release, just a quiet entry in a government ledger. All of them had trace markers pointing back to the Lazarus ID. I didn't sleep. The next morning, my clearance had changed. I didn't request it. Admins swore I'd been upgraded to Tier 3 under internal reclassification protocol. It gave me access to repositories I'd never seen, early-stage clinical results, neural modeling, classified cell stress trials. Among them was a folder labeled LZR Backup. Inside, raw footage of stem cell cultures reverting senescence. DNA with repair fidelity exceeding theoretical limits. Notes from subjects logged only by number, not name. The logs weren't dated, but the file headers used a format phased out in 1999. That was the moment something clicked. The Lazarus Project didn't fail. It metastasized, and someone was still using it. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the office had become. Not quiet, like usual dead quiet, as if someone had lowered the ambient noise of reality by a few notches. Screens still flickered, keyboards still clicked. But there was something hollow about the sound, like it echoed off walls that weren't really there. I minimized the Lazarus backup folder and stared at my desktop. 2 new icons had appeared. One was labeled Auth-log Expand, the other simply read Mirror. I hadn't installed them. I checked the activity logs, no updates, no remote pushes. The files had just appeared. I opened Auth-log Expand. It was a log of access credentials, who had entered which parts of the database and when. My ID was at the top, tiered accesses granted at 02:37 a.m., but I hadn't logged in then. According to the log, I'd accessed restricted neural prototype. Data reviewed 3 case files tagged with red level clearance and overridden 2 encryption layers. I hadn't done any of that. I ran a timestamp check across internal logs. The trail was clean, too clean. There were no flags, no unauthorized entries, no signs of spoofed credentials. Whatever had granted me access had also scrubbed the footprints. Either I was being set up, or someone wanted me to see this, and not question how. I opened the second file, Mirror. It launched a live feed, a window into a partitioned system I didn't recognize. A neural loop monitor. At first it looked like generic sleep pattern data, oscillating brainwave readouts, but the file names were what stopped me. Each was tagged with a numeric code that matched the Lazarus patient logs. Subject 03, Subject 08, Subject 11 each. Pattern was nearly identical, looping every 47 minutes. Not natural cycles, repetitions. I watched one cycle reset itself in real time. At the exact same moment I received an incoming call. Unknown ID, no number, just a single waveform icon. I let it ring. On the 5th chime, it answered itself. What played wasn't a voice. It was me, my own voice, reading back lines from my private notes. Notes I'd never spoken aloud, notes I'd only typed, alone, at home. My blood went cold. Whatever Lazarus was, it had already reached me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard myself speaking, my voice repeating lines I couldn't remember saying. I ran system checks on my devices. No malware, no backdoors, no trace of the audio file that had played. It had erased itself as soon as the call ended. The only thing left was a faint, residual hum in my headset, like feedback from a transmission long gone. I told myself to stop, to close the folders, walk away, reset my machine, and forget it happened, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled the access it, logs again, and cross-referenced them with archived internal comms. That's when I noticed the anomaly. A pattern of silent reassignments within the biotech agencies linked to Lazarus. Each time a researcher disappeared from public view, a new patent would emerge 3 months later. The names were different, the companies too, but the structure was the same. A clean break followed by innovation too advanced to explain. At 4:12 a.m. I received another file, this time via encrypted Dropbox, unsigned. A single video. Black screen, then static. Then a low-resolution feed of a medical exam room. A man sat in a chair, strapped in, pupils dilated. A voice off camera asked for his name. The man paused, then answered, "I don't know. I knew before, but I don't now." He looked directly into the camera as if he could see me. "If you're watching this, they missed something. It's still in here." He tapped his temple twice. Then the screen cut to black. I paused the frame just before the feed ended. There, in the lower right, was a date stamp. March 1997, the exact year Project Lazarus was supposedly shut down. The timestamp matched one of the original test subject files I'd accessed earlier, Subject DIRB3. I pulled his neural loop from Mirror again. It was still looping, still active. Not archived, not historical. Real-time telemetry. That man, whoever he was, hadn't disappeared. He'd been reset, and if they could reset him, they could reset anyone, even me. That thought landed heavy. I wasn't investigating Lazarus anymore. I was inside it, and I didn't know how deep. The following morning, my keycard stopped working. Not an error, just a soft denial. No access granted. Security shrugged, told me IT must have reset the system, but I knew better. They were locking me out. When I got home, the changes were subtle but undeniable. My home assistant had factory reset overnight. My inbox was empty. Every email, even the junk, wiped. Clean. My phone had no recent calls. My backup server, which I kept physically isolated from the grid, was empty. Not corrupted, just blank. As if nothing had ever been stored there. I checked my social accounts. Everyone had been deactivated, some deleted entirely. Even old photo, tags of me from other people's accounts were gone. The metadata was intact, the dates and captions remained, but I had been scrubbed from the images. Panic didn't come in a wave. It arrived slowly, like fog rolling in under the door. I drove to my parents' house, 3 hours out of the city, off-grid, where I knew the signal was weak. My father opened the door but didn't recognize me. Not in the way a parent forgets a distant child, but in the way a stranger reacts to someone they've never met. My mother came to the porch, and the look on her face broke me. Fear, not confusion. She reached for her phone before I could say a word. I didn't wait to see who she called. I drove to the only place left that didn't feel like a trap. An old co-worker from the registry, Ravi. He'd always been curious, like me. Never trusted the upgrades. He let me in without asking questions. His place was cluttered with analog tech, paper records, shortwave radios. I told him everything. He listened without interruption. When I was done, he pulled out a small, encrypted drive and handed it to me. "I've been tracking Lazarus through off-grid networks," he said. "There's a group, calls itself Echo. They're not a resistance exactly, more like a memory farm. People who slipped through before the resets took hold." He looked at me carefully. "They're going to ask questions, hard ones, because they think you were one of them once." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. Ravi set up a secure terminal in his basement, powered by a battery array he'd built from salvaged telecom gear. He used to work in systems integration for a contractor tied to military networks until he asked too many questions about a missing archive and got buried in an HR reshuffle. He'd kept watching ever since. The drive he gave me contained a bootable OS with a single executable, echo.lnk. When I launched it, the screen went black. White dots pulsed in sequence, then a prompt appeared. "State your origin." I typed, "Registry archivist, accessed Lazarus accidentally." A pause, then, "Accidental does not exist." More dots. Then, "Initiate passive sync." A low hum came through the speakers. At first, I thought it was feedback, but Ravi stiffened. "It's scanning your loop," he said. "Baseline deviation check." The screen flickered, then stabilized. A contact came through under the designation OCT1. The message was precise. Subject 17, anomaly threshold exceeded. Drift signature confirms third relapse. Containment protocol failed. I sat back. Subject 17. They weren't asking, they were identifying me. I replied, I don't remember any cycles. What was reset? OCT1 answered, Lazarus regression protocol incomplete. Cognitive firewall failed to anchor. Your original memory index corrupted but not erased. This curiosity, it's a recurrence. Ravi leaned over the monitor. That's why they haven't scrubbed you completely. You're glitching between resets, too unstable to recycle, too conscious to contain. I felt the ground tilt. So, I've done this before? Twice, both times partial breach. Echo flagged residual anomalies. You left traces, deep metadata imprints. No full extraction achieved. Why me? I typed. Another pause. You're a control subject. Experimental loop designed to simulate reintegration after memory suppression. But you retained pattern recognition. You weren't supposed to wake up. The final message hit hard. Data packet incoming. Full divergence logs. Trace yourself. Decide what matters. As the download began, I turned to Ravi. What happens if I see the break? He looked at me, measured. Then you stop chasing the truth like it's new, and start remembering why you wanted it in the first place. The file labeled DVXEB17 opened into a timeline overlay. 2 versions of my life layered side by side. On the left, the version I remembered. Routine shifts at the registry. A drab apartment. Isolated weekends. Familiar patterns. On the right, an unlogged period beginning late 2021, my enrollment into a private clinical study under a Shell grant called Life Cycle Institute. It was a front for Lazarus. I'd volunteered under financial duress. The logs showed a neuroadaptive implant trial tied to accelerated recovery. The contract was vague. I signed it without reading beyond the payout clause. From there, the records blurred. A series of memory loops began. Weeks rewritten, full resets attempted. On paper, I reintegrated. The scans told a different story. I wasn't syncing. My brain resisted full overwrite. Neural latency increased with each reset. Fragment retention crept above protocol limits. I wasn't learning. I was leaking. Ravi examined the divergence logs with clinical detachment. You hit instability during loop 3, he said. They tried suppressive conditioning, but your pattern-matching cortex reactivated too early. It's rare. That's why Echo flagged you. I stared at my own biometrics. Pulse variance, REM inconsistencies, emotional drift. My curiosity hadn't been a choice. It was cognitive bleed-through. I'd tried to uncover Lazarus before. Each time, they'd reset me. Each time, I'd looped back to the same questions. My throat felt tight. If I've already breached twice, why let me get this far again? Ravi paused. Maybe they didn't mean to, or maybe you were a decoy, a controlled leak to test containment, but the cracks are too wide now. You're remembering more than they can wipe. I sat with the thought. The idea that my life was a script, one I kept misreading, cut deep. I wasn't resisting a conspiracy. I was a product of it. Built, broken, rebuilt. The divergence log didn't show rebellion. It showed relapse. I asked, if I've already failed twice, what makes this time different? Ravi handed me a portable drive. You're not the only one who remembers now. We prepped the data for transmission. Everything. The Lazarus loop architecture, control subject logs, cross-agency patent correlations, my own neural divergence, overlay. Echo gave us a transient uplink. Masked through ghost routers, it wouldn't last more than 3 minutes. Ravi wired a manual cutoff to the battery array. Once it starts, they'll trace the signal instantly. We get one shot. I added a final segment, my memory logs, fragmented but time-stamped, showing the recurrence. Proof I'd been rewritten. It wasn't about whistleblowing anymore. It was about showing that memory itself could be falsified and restored. The moment we launched the broadcast, their response began. Background processes spiked, ports flooded, static across our backup line. Ravi shouted over the noise, "Keep the core log moving, encrypt in layers." We watched the data mirror to off-grid servers. Independent watchdogs picked it up first, then fringe journalists, then subnets. Within the hour, someone traced the drug patents to Lazarus-linked research groups. A pattern emerged: lost researchers, sudden medical breakthroughs, silent regulatory approvals, no press releases, no public trials, just the quiet monetization of stolen time. Pharmaceutical stock tickers began to flicker, not collapse, just show signs of stress. Analysts couldn't explain the pattern. That didn't matter. People were watching. Someone out there remembered me, even if the systems didn't. Then the wipe began. My DMV record vanished. Banking access revoked. Employment, history gone. Even Ravi's address pinged blank in the GPS. We weren't erased, we were removed. He turned to me, face pale. "They're not deleting you, they're quarantining you, making sure no one sees the loop again." The last file transferred. A checksum confirmed delivery. I looked at Ravi and said, "It's done." He nodded. "It won't save the world." "I know," I said. "But it might wake someone up." In the days that followed, I felt myself slipping, bit by bit. I left voice logs in a private subnet, time-stamped and tagged. The mind degrades without an anchor, but the code holds. Now I exist as a residual loop, half thought, half memory, embedded in the system I once archived, a ghost in the breach, waiting for the next one to remember. When a dead soldier sends you coordinates, you don't ask how, you ask why. I didn't believe it either. Not until I saw my name in the classified files next to the words Chimera Administrator. I got the message at 2:47 a.m. a GPS. Ping embedded in a decrypted military comburst routed through an old unit channel that hadn't been active in years. The sender's ID was impossible. Staff Sergeant Julian Mace, killed in Kandahar, 2007. I attended the burial, closed casket. No doubts, I should have dismissed it. Probably some cruel glitch. A line ghost echoing in the signal net. But something about the attachment made me stop. A single PDF, bare bones, barely legible, referencing a defunct DARPA op called Project Chimera. Top secret Reagan-era joint task with a pharmaceutical contractor I didn't recognize. According to the file, Chimera cured cancer in 1984 using a weaponized virus designed to overwrite malignant cell behavior. But it didn't just kill tumors, it rewrote biology. The virus was sealed under black classification when test subjects showed signs of rapid cellular regeneration, immune to disease, resistant to trauma, and neurologically altered. Not just physically stronger, something deeper, rewired. The ping was tied to a set of coordinates in the Arizona desert, west of Gila Bend, just past the broken ridgeline where old training compounds used to sit. There was no name on the location, no record of ownership, no satellite pings, no recent scans. A ghost spot. Dead land. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself it was grief. My sister died last year, pancreatic cancer. Took everything from her before the chemo even had a chance. But if I'm honest, it was guilt, because part of me remembered something, not clearly, just flashes. A steel corridor, a voice on the radio, a syringe I didn't question, so I packed. Light, no phone, no signal, just burner gear, basic loadout, and a thermal drone. If Chimera was real, someone went to a lot of trouble to bury it. Maybe it should have stayed that way. But I couldn't stop thinking about Julian. He'd only ever pinged me once before, 2 days before his patrol got wiped. And now he'd done it again. The compound sat half buried in red sand, its roofline barely visible under the ridgeline's shadow. There were no fences, no patrols, just a concrete shell with sun-faded hazard signs and a rusted keypad by the door. The keypad still worked. I punched in a 6-digit code I hadn't thought about in years. The lock clicked open without hesitation. That should have been the first warning. Inside, the air was dry and stale. The main corridor sloped down at an angle, lit by flickering emergency strips buried in the ceiling panels. The walls were scorched, intermittent, blast marks as if something had burned outward from within. I found bones melted into the concrete near the first checkpoint. Human remains. Not recent. Most of the facility was still sealed. Old biometric locks blinked red when I passed, but a few responded to my touch, scanning my palm and allowing entry. I didn't know how that was possible. My prints were purged after I left active duty. But this system remembered me, or someone wanted it to. I moved slowly, checking corners, watching thermals. No signs of life, but the place hummed faintly as if running on backup power. In the medical wing, I found rows of shattered cryotubes. Only one was intact, locked behind reinforced glass. Its label read V1 host, subject 0, female, late 20s, still alive. Cryostasis holding. Her vitals pulsed steady in the corner of the screen. The farther I went, the more memories pulled at me, things I couldn't fully place. A metal tray. A voice reading numbers, screams, my hands shaking over a syringe. There were no names in the rooms, just numbers on doors and notes etched into glass walls like someone had tried to scratch their way out. Near the central hub, I found a darkened server room. Power was still active. I connected my tablet and began a slow scrape of local files. One folder was labeled Field Ops 1985. Inside were image stills, field notes, and a short video. The footage froze me. It showed me, in uniform, administering an injection to a soldier with half his chest missing. The date stamp was June 3rd, 1985. A year before I enlisted. I replayed the video 3 times, searching for any sign it was fake. But the details were too precise. My posture, the scar over my left brow, the serial code on my uniform sleeve. The soldier on the stretcher gasped as I injected him. Moments later, his collapsed lung re-inflated. The bleeding stopped. He blinked, alert. Then the video cut. The metadata confirmed the date, June 3rd, 1985. I enlisted in July 1986, officially. This footage was either fabricated with impossible accuracy, or I'd been part of something long before my memory began. I found more files, mission logs, test results, surveillance clips. They referenced field trials under hostile conditions, civilians marked as volunteer targets, injured personnel used for unauthorized biologic vector assessment. The term kept appearing, Chimera live deployment trials. And my name was on nearly every form, logged as lead protocol technician. Somewhere between those files and the dim hallway outside, I started to feel it, a pressure in my head, not pain, something deeper, like static crawling just beneath the surface of thought. I ignored it and moved on deeper into the facility's lower level. Signs of conflict became more frequent. Scorch marks, automated turrets long burned out, smeared handprints on cracked glass. Something had gotten loose, or been let loose. In the operations center, I found a bank of monitors tied into the facility's last command protocol. One was still active, cycling through audio archives. I queued up the most recent file. My voice came through the speaker, calm, precise, Holder. This is Holden. Initiate containment breach protocol. Host compromised. Full burn recommended. Do not engage directly. Repeat, do not engage. The file was dated July 14, 1997. I remember that day. I was in Bosnia, patching gunshot wounds outside Tuzla. Or at least that's what I thought. But the timeline didn't fit anymore. My deployments, my records, everything felt wrong. As I backed away from the terminal, the lights in the corridor flickered, then cut out completely. The hum stopped. Silence followed. Then faintly, from the intercom above the door, I heard it again. My voice. Repeating a phrase I never remembered saying. You are the key. The lock is your blood. The facility came alive the moment the recording ended. Emergency lights snapped on in harsh red pulses. A low, mechanical alarm pulsed through the corridors, slow, deliberate, almost like breathing. A hidden ventilation duct opened near the ceiling and released a fine mist. I recognized the scent immediately. Decon fog. Something had been triggered. I moved fast, retracing my steps toward the cryo wing. The containment seal on the V1 host chamber had unlocked. The cryotube still held pressure, but the internal systems showed changes. Core temperature rising, oxygen flow stabilizing. She was waking up. I tried to access the controls, but the interface rejected my credentials. An override protocol had been initiated. My biometrics weren't just accepted, they were required. I was the failsafe. A line of text scrolled across the screen. Viral spore activation confirmed. Vector code Holden A. Somehow, just entering the facility had reawakened Chimera, and I had brought it with me. Sweat formed along my spine as I backed out of the control room. Static buzzed in my ear. My headset, previously dead, sparked with distorted feedback. Then a voice came through, my own, warped and grainy. Containment breach acknowledged. Surveillance reset. Autonomous defense protocol active. The facility's internal systems were responding to me like I was still in command, or like I was part of the system. I needed to get out. But as I reached the exit corridor, the bulkhead doors sealed shut. 3 drones dropped from ceiling mounts, silent and armed. I ducked behind a support pillar, heart pounding. They didn't fire. Instead, they hovered, watching. I triggered a manual failsafe near the eastern sublevel. The floor panels vibrated as a secondary tunnel unlocked. A maintenance route. Not on any map, I remembered. I grabbed the portable power unit connected to the cryotube and started hauling it with me. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I couldn't leave her behind. The spores were active. My blood had triggered the breach. If the virus was rewriting me, I needed answers before I lost control. Somewhere behind me, the intercom crackled again. Subject 0 sync in progress, link integrity rising, prepare for convergence. The tunnel sloped downward, lined with service pipes and cracked conduits. The portable cryotube hummed softly behind me, its wheels straining against the uneven concrete. Every few steps I checked my vitals on the drone wrist pad. Elevated heart rate, core temperature climbing, skin conductivity spiking. The infections had started. The tunnel ended at a sealed chamber. Manual override still worked. I disabled the lock and pulled the door open. The room beyond was circular, lined with old monitoring equipment and deactivated terminals. In the center was a reinforced medical rig. I maneuvered the cryotube onto it and began the thaw sequence. Steam hissed from the vents as the pod unsealed. Vital readings stabilized. Her heart rate was strong, oxygen levels normal, neural activity increasing. I braced myself. She opened her eyes. They didn't flicker or roll. They focused directly on me, calm, aware. Her voice came out low, but clear. "Reese." My legs almost gave out. I hadn't heard that voice in nearly 2 decades. Not since a forward operations base in southern Colombia. Not since she disappeared. "You remember?" I said. She nodded. Not everything, but enough. I helped her sit up. Her movements were fluid, unhurried. She examined her arms, flexed her fingers, then looked back at me. "You thought I died?" I nodded. I'd seen the report. Host failure, containment successful, subject neutralized, but I never saw the body. "You were the first to stabilize," I said. "The only one." She looked at my arm, then my face. "You're changing. You feel it." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "They lied to you," she said. "You didn't just test Chimera. You carried it. You always did. That's why they sent you to the field. That's why they erased your memory." I felt the truth settle inside me like a weight I'd been carrying without knowing. She was right. The flashbacks, the missing time, the strange resilience I chalked up to luck. It was never luck. "There's no cure," I said quietly. She shook her head. "No, but there's a choice." We moved to the backup med bay 2 levels below. The tunnel had collapsed halfway through, so we climbed over steel wreckage and broken scaffolding. She didn't struggle. Her balance was perfect, her breathing steady. I felt clumsy beside her. My hands shook when I reached for the access panel. I blamed fatigue, but deep down I knew it was the virus. Inside the med bay, I scanned both of us. Her neural patterns were stable, complex, but synchronized. Mine weren't. They were shifting, regions of my brain lighting up in sequences I didn't recognize. Areas related to language, emotion, memory. The virus wasn't killing me. It was rewriting me. She watched the screen, then looked at me. You have maybe 2 hours before the changes take hold. Then we use the time, I said. We pulled every usable tool from storage, a portable sequencer, an old bio-sandbox, a neural stabilizer that hadn't been calibrated in decades. I didn't need to ask if she remembered how to use them. She moved with purpose. Each step, part of a routine she hadn't performed in years, yet never forgot. As we worked, memories came back. Not in flashes, but as full sequences, missions I thought were ordinary turned experimental, wounded soldiers who recovered too fast, civilians quarantined after contact. They weren't coincidences. They were controlled releases. I was the carrier. Why me? I asked. She paused, looked up from the console. Because you survived it without breaking. You stabilized before anyone realized it. And you? You gave it to me. You thought I died, but I adapted. I wasn't alone down here. Not at first. I understood the silence that followed. Others had been stored. Maybe woken. Maybe not. She finished compiling a code map, an adaptive strain signature based on both our readings. It wasn't a cure, but it could serve as a key. A backdoor into the Chimera protocol. What does it do? I asked. Stops the full overwrite, keeps your mind intact but opens the signal. The signal? She nodded. Chimera isn't just biology, it's transmission. You've heard it already. You just didn't realize. My ears rang. Not from noise, but from something deeper, something constant. I had heard it. And it was getting louder. I didn't sleep. There wasn't time. The signal pulsed inside my head like a second heartbeat. Steady, cold, and deliberate. I felt my thoughts stretch thin like something else was moving through them. Not taking over. Not yet. Just waiting. She sat across from me watching the final sequence compile. The back door was nearly complete. Once uploaded, it would force the system to expose itself. Send every Chimera file across the black net, untraceable and irreversible. There would be no shutting it down. Once it leaves this place, I said, people will use it. They'll think it's salvation. Some will, she replied. Some will see the cost. I stood, legs unsteady. My skin felt hot, muscles tight. My vision had started shifting, edges too sharp, light too bright. But I still knew who I was, just barely. What happens to me? She didn't answer right away. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. You won't die, she said. You'll change. You'll lose the separation. You'll become part of the signal. I believed her. I could feel it already. The virus wasn't erasing me. It was absorbing me. I walked to the console and entered the upload command. The files streamed into open channels, leaching into every unsecured medical node worldwide. Research labs, emergency networks, underground archives. Within minutes, the Chimera protocol was everywhere. Not just as data, but as executable code, a seed that offered immunity, regeneration, and something else, neurological shift. Anyone could download it, Anyone could activate it. The virus didn't need vectors anymore, it only needed users. She watched the data flood out, her eyes clear. No fear, no regret. I turned to her one last time. Was I ever meant to stop it? No, she said softly. You were meant to remember it. That's why it waited for you. The signal inside me surged. I dropped to one knee. My vision blurred, the light fractured, too sharp, too much. Nothing looked normal anymore. I saw systems, frequencies, movements across continents. The virus had no plan. It offered a question. Live as we are, or evolve. In my final human thought, I saw the truth. Chimera wasn't hidden because it failed. It was hidden because it worked. And now the choice belongs to everyone. I didn't come here looking for salvation. I came because something in his notes shouldn't have been possible. I hadn't set foot in the Amazon in nearly 12 years. Not since the flare-ups had forced me back into city hospitals and sterile white walls. But when a battered envelope arrived, no return address, just my late mentor's scrawl and a copy of field notes marked with the word reactivation, I booked the charter flight within 48 hours. Inside I found references to a plant I didn't recognize. Not by genus, not by region. Just a sketch of long, lanceolate leaves, veins branching in mirrored symmetry, and a note, immune cascade reset, observed in all test subjects. No timestamp, no coordinates, but I knew the handwriting, knew how meticulous he'd been, and if Ramon said something reset the immune cascade, I had to see it myself. My funders thought I was chasing rare alkaloids, a potential immunomodulator. For patent development, I didn't correct them. Their check cleared and I needed their plane more than I needed their trust. The guide they assigned me, Matthias, was former military. Spoke little. Moved like the underbrush respected him. We travelled upriver for 2 days, cutting through silt and heat and clouds of insects that seemed to have memories. By the third morning we reached the plateau he'd marked with an X on my overlaid satellite map. The air shifted there, denser, quieter, like sound itself bent around the trees. The villagers didn't speak much Spanish, but they watched us carefully. I gave the healer my mentor's name. Her expression changed. She asked if I was family. I told her yes. That night I watched her prepare a poultice from leaves I'd never seen. She applied it to a child's leg, swollen and red with infection. By morning the swelling was gone. I asked if I could study the plant. She laughed, not cruelly. It does not grow outside. She meant outside here. I knew what she was saying, even if she didn't explain. Not all things want to be found, but that's never stopped people like me before. By the 4th day, the equipment began to act up. My satellite link, which had held steady through storms and canopies before, cut out for hours at a time. Camera. Batteries drained faster than their charge cycles allowed. My field laptop wouldn't boot without a hard reset every morning, and the hard drive fan made a strange clicking noise I'd never heard before. I blamed the heat, the humidity, my own inexperience with older gear, but part of me knew better. These weren't the usual failures. Something was interfering. Still I pressed on. I had managed to collect 5 leaf samples under the healer's supervision. She allowed me no more than a few minutes with each, always watching, always silent. I ran quick surface assays using what little portable equipment I had. The results were inconclusive, but strange, protein markers I couldn't identify. One reaction triggered a rapid pH shift that briefly fogged the lens of my handheld scanner. That shouldn't have been possible. Matthias watched me work with quiet interest, but said nothing until we returned to camp that evening. "The plant," he said finally, poking at a weak campfire, "has a name in the old language, Chiwa. It means to stay alive too long." I asked if that was a blessing or a warning. He shrugged. "Depends who wants to live." That night, our drone, used for canopy scans, crashed less than 20 minutes after takeoff. The footage, what little it captured, was corrupted, static and blur like a scratched lens. I went through it, frame by frame, until I caught something, a glint, not natural, embedded in the foliage. Metallic, structured. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., a time none of us had launched the device. I asked Matthias if he'd flown it. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I never touch machines." In the morning, Renata, our biochem assistant, was gone. Her tent was zipped from the inside, supplies untouched, no signs of struggle. Matthias and I searched until dusk. No footprints, no scent trail. Just one thing left behind on her cot, my mentor's old notebook. The pages were damp, but one entry was still legible. It read, "They always follow the seed, not the scientist." We broke camp the next morning without speaking much. Renata was still gone, and Matthias had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel like grief. It felt like protocol. He didn't ask to search again. He didn't bring up her name. When I pressed, he just said, if they take someone, they don't bring them back. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. I focused on preserving the samples and encrypting my notes on a portable drive. I backed everything up 3 times and sealed the leaves in vacuum pouches laced with ethanol, knowing I was preparing for extraction now, not discovery. That afternoon, I returned to the plateau alone to record one final sight reading. The village was silent when I passed through, doors shut, no children playing, no fires burning. I found the healer waiting beside the path with her arms crossed. She handed me a woven satchel, wordless. Inside was a small pot containing a single seedling, roots wrapped in black soil that smelled like iron and ash. The leaves were closed, as if asleep. I tried to thank her, but she raised her hand and said only, "Do not plant it. Not where the sky can see." That evening, Matthias and I packed under the weight of silence. The extraction team was due in 3 days, but I didn't trust the radio anymore. The static wasn't random. It came in intervals, short bursts, evenly spaced, like pulses or signals. At midnight, I woke to the sound of someone moving outside the perimeter. Matthias wasn't. In his tent. I stepped out with my flashlight and scanned the trees. No eyeshine, no animal sounds, just branches shifting, slow and deliberate. I found him by the riverbank staring across the water. "They're here," he said. "They've been waiting." I asked who. He didn't turn around. Not the tribe. Not the company, something else. His voice was flat, like he was repeating something already decided. The next morning, he was dead. A fall, they said. Broken neck. But the body had no bruises, no scrapes, no sign of a tumble down the ravine. Just a thin line across his throat, shallow but clean, like a warning, not a kill. I buried him myself, knees in the wet soil, hands trembling as I packed the earth over his body. I said nothing aloud, but my mind screamed questions I had no language for. Who staged this? Why leave me alive? I stayed by the grave until dusk, the sounds of the jungle growing distant, like I'd already left. That night, I zipped the seedling into my pack, sealed the notebook, and didn't sleep. I left the jungle before sunrise, heart hollow and skin burning with the feeling that someone, something, was watching me leave. I landed in São Paulo under a different name. I used a prepaid phone, paid cash for a hotel room, and kept the seedling wrapped in its lining at the bottom of my pack. The soil had dried slightly during the trip, but the leaves were still alive, folded inward, trembling faintly when I unzipped the satchel in the bathroom. I recorded everything: photos, time-stamped videos, short verbal logs. Then I tried to upload the files to my university's secure server. The connection failed twice. On the third attempt, the files vanished mid-transfer, replaced by a blank screen and a single message: unauthorized access, blocked, session terminated. I checked my email next. My credentials no longer worked. I created a burner account and sent a short message to a colleague in genetics. Within 5 minutes, it bounced back: recipient address not found. When I called her direct line, I reached a recorded message that claimed the number was inactive. I tried my backup storage drive. Half of the data was labeled corrupted, and the rest wouldn't open. All my backups wiped. Nothing about it was random. That night, someone slipped an envelope under my hotel door. No note. Just a bank statement printed on high-quality paper showing a recent deposit of $100,000 into an account under my name, an account I'd never opened. The memo line read, "Consulting services rendered." I went to the front desk and asked about the envelope. The woman behind the counter didn't even check the cameras. She just looked at me for a second too long, then said, "No one came in. I packed before sunrise and moved across the city." Another hotel? No real names. I wrapped the seedling tighter and booked a flight out of the country using a secondary passport I hadn't touched in years. At the airport, I passed through customs clean, no flags, no questions. But as I sat in the departure lounge, a man in a pressed suit and no visible badge sat down 2 rows ahead of me. He didn't look at me once, but he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and walked away without a word. 10 seconds later, my boarding pass disappeared from my app. The screen read, "Session expired. Contact airline staff." I didn't. I walked out the side exit and kept moving. In the last pages of Ramon's journal, one line stood out: "If she finds it, she's earned the key." I moved between cities for 2 weeks, never staying more than 2 nights. Cheap motels, borrowed names, always paid in cash. The seedling stayed wrapped, tucked inside a hard case with silica packets and minimal light. It remained alive, leaves, twitching slightly whenever I touched the case. I couldn't explain it, but I stopped trying. My focus shifted to exposure. I started with open science forums. I uploaded fragments, chemical data, blurred microscope shots, vague descriptions. Nothing specific enough to trace, but enough to stir interest. Each post was deleted within minutes, accounts locked. IP addresses blacklisted. I switched to private mailing lists, sent encrypted zip files to a handful of researchers I trusted, people I'd known for years. 2 responded. One said nothing useful, just vague curiosity. The other, a molecular biologist in Berlin, asked to set up a call. The next morning, his number was disconnected. I tried reaching him through a university channel, but the site was down. Maintenance, the banner claimed. It never came back up. That same afternoon, I received a text on a device I hadn't used since grad school. You're being watched. Stop sending files. They're inside your network. There was no signature, no return path. I smashed the phone in the hotel sink and flushed the pieces. That night, my room was broken into. Nothing stolen. Not the laptop, not the cash, not the seedling, but the mirror was cracked and the closet door was open. It hadn't been when I left. I stayed up until morning, then checked out without speaking to anyone. I flew under a 3rd alias to Montreal using an old diplomatic contact. No security. Delays this time, no glitches, almost like they'd stopped trying to scare me and started tracking instead. From the airport, I went straight to a data center on the outskirts of the city. I bought 3 hours of isolated server time and uploaded a scrambled version of the genome data. I used a dead node address and scheduled the file to auto-send if I didn't reset the timer in 5 days. Insurance. That night, I checked into a basement rental with no windows. The seedling went under a grow lamp for the first time. The leaves opened slowly. I filmed it. I unplugged the lamp. The tone continued. I moved the mic. It grew louder as I neared the plant. The tone didn't register on any of my standard equipment. I had to borrow an old field recorder and adjust the gain manually just to pick it up. 17-second intervals. Subsonic, rhythmic, almost like a beacon. I ran it through an audio analyzer. The waveform was structured, too precise for biological noise. I fed it into a spectrogram and found something else. Embedded in the pattern was a signature, a repeating string of base pairs. It matched one of the sequences I'd lifted from the encrypted genome, a dormant gene cluster previously dismissed as non-coding. It wasn't dormant, it was broadcasting. That's when I knew this wasn't just a plant. It was designed to be found. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. His name was Adrian Coe, a former pharmacogenomics lead who disappeared after testifying in a closed-door ethics hearing 6 years earlier. Back then, he'd hinted at buried trials, botanical strains with immune-responsive traits beyond anything on record. I found him through a closed science relay, buried under a pseudonym and posting irregular bursts of molecular theory in outdated syntax. I sent a message, no details, just the pattern. He replied 5 hours later. A single sentence, Svalbard, Subvault 3, Project Odin. I stared at the screen, unsure if it was a code or a place. Then I remembered the Svalbard Seed Vault, the Doomsday archive built to store every known crop genome on Earth. It had no official subdivisions, no Project Odin, but the name matched something in my mentor's notebook, a margin scribble I had once dismissed. Odin holds what should not be sown. I booked the flight under a false humanitarian pretense and landed in Longyearbyen during whiteout season. I posed as a data archivist and got within 100 meters of the main facility before I was turned away. High clearance only, private sector, access suspended, but I didn't need the front door. I had coordinates. As I climbed the icy ridge, I spotted a drone in the far sky. Small, silent, moving against the wind. Didn't follow me, just hovered. When I passed through the last rock outcrop toward the access tunnel, it vanished. I wasn't alone here, but I was already too close to stop. That night I hiked around the perimeter. Sub-Vault 3 was real. It was below the mountain, not inside it. A separate access tunnel, rusted shut, but still wired. I pried it open and stepped inside. The corridor was cold, dry, and lit by motion-sensitive LEDs. At the end, a biometric scanner blinked red. I froze, expecting a lockout. Then it turned green. I didn't enter a passcode or scan my palm, but it recognized something, maybe the seed, maybe me. I remembered his note again. She's earned the key. The vault door slid open without a sound. Inside, the air was colder than the tunnel, dry and still. Rows of cryogenic lockers lined the chamber, each marked with numeric codes instead of names. A terminal at the center hummed faintly, its screen black until I stepped closer. Then it flickered to life. No login prompt, just a blinking line of text. Omega seed. Registered. Final log accessed. I opened the file. It was a report, dated 16 years ago, authored by my mentor. The language was clinical, but the implications were clear. He hadn't just found the seed, he had sequenced it, verified its regenerative profile, and submitted a proposal to the board of an international biotech coalition. They had filed it under Project Odin and locked it here, citing pharmaceutical destabilization risk. The cure was never rejected, it was buried. Below the log were timestamps, 2 names attached to the deletion orders. One belonged to a former director of a pharmaceutical conglomerate now retired. The other was a current member of a global agricultural advisory panel. I copied the files and backed them up 3 times. Then I opened the final locker, drawn by a quiet vibration I felt more than heard. Inside was another seedling. Smaller than mine, but alive. Its leaves pulsed faintly with the same rhythm. I took it. On the flight back, I didn't sleep. I rerouted through Iceland, then to an independent lab in Portugal, known for its open-source ethos. I released the genome quietly, no headlines, no fanfare, just a secure dump on a public science node, cross-referenced and anonymized. It spread within hours. Researchers flagged it. Forums lit up. I watched as mirrored copies appeared on servers across 5 continents. By morning it couldn't be erased, but I didn't stop there. I built a repository. Video proof, test footage, growth guides. I gave the plant a name, Omega, and signed off under a string of pseudonyms. Then I disappeared. Months passed. I watched from the edges as small farms began growing it. Patients with resistant autoimmune conditions reported recoveries. Pharmaceutical stocks dipped. And in the silence that followed, I understood the cost. It was never about curing disease. It was about who controlled the cure. But the seed is out now, and truth, once rooted, doesn't die quietly. They said the biotech revolution saved us, but they never told us what it cost. I worked in data archiving at Helix Corp. My job was to organize old research files, trials that were shut down years ago. Most of them were marked as useless or outdated. I didn't ask questions. I liked the routine. I liked being invisible. But that day, something strange happened. A file opened by itself. It wasn't part of my schedule. It had no clearance tag. The title just said, Calyx Protocol, Phase 2. The first half of the file was broken. The second half was readable, and it felt wrong. 7 patients. Brain damage reversed completely. They were called successes. But then it said, all subjects went missing after treatment. Another line, gene passed to children. Remove all carriers. That was the moment I felt real fear. Before I could read it again, everything locked down. Flashed red. My screen went black. I sat frozen. No one came. When the system came back online, the file was gone, not deleted, gone like it was never there. Then things got worse. My ID stopped working. My email disappeared. Even my messages from earlier that morning were missing. It was like someone was erasing me. When I got home, my door code didn't work. Inside, everything had been touched. Drawers open, my spare.
Inhaler is full of water in the sink. I didn't sleep that night.
The next day, a black car tried to push me off the road. No license plate. I caught a glimpse of the driver, and my stomach dropped. She looked like me. Same face, same scar, but older. She smiled like she knew me. I drove through a red light and didn't stop. That was the last normal moment I ever had. My name is Lena Miles, and until a week ago, I thought I was just another file clerk in a company built on progress, not a living secret they were trying to erase. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful, too early for neighbors. I didn't move. I just listened. Then 3 knocks. Not loud, not rushed. I waited. Another knock. I grabbed my phone, but it was dead.
I could have sworn I charged it. I reached for the backup under my bed. Gone. My heart picked up. I moved to the kitchen, grabbed a small knife out of the drawer.
Stupid, maybe, but it was all I had. The door opened before I could react. They had my override code. 2 people stepped inside, man and woman, both in plain clothes. No badges, no weapons I could see. The woman raised her hands. Lena, we're not here to hurt you. I didn't answer. The man spoke next. Please come with us. We don't have much time. You're being watched. I shook my head. Who are you? The woman looked me in the eye. Family. I laughed, but it came out dry. I wanted to laugh again, louder this time, but something held me back. That scar above her eyebrow. The one I'd seen in the mirror since I was 12. I didn't trust her, but I couldn't explain the chill that ran through me either.
I don't have any. She stepped closer. You do. We've been trying to reach you for years. That's when I saw it. Her eyes, same shade as mine. Same small scar above her brow. I didn't drop the knife, but my grip loosened. Proof.
It. She reached into her coat, slowly, and pulled out a folded photo. Me, as a toddler, standing in front of a glass dome covered in green vines. A hand rested on my shoulder. The face was blurred, but the necklace was clear. My necklace. The one I'd had since I was a child. The one my mother said came from a market in Madrid. My knees felt weak. I didn't speak again until we were in the car, driving fast down back roads. The man kept checking the rear view. The woman finally said it. You weren't born in the city, Lena. You were born on Isla Calix. I blinked. That place doesn't exist. That's what they want you to think, she said. But it's real. And so are you. The drive took hours. We crossed bridges I'd never seen on any map, passed through tunnels without names, no signs, no cell service. Just a long, quiet ride that felt more like a disappearance than a trip. The woman, who finally introduced herself as Mara, said very little. The man, Kalen, spoke even less. I sat in the back, my mind circling the same question. What is Isla Calix? We reached the dock just before sunset. A small boat waited, its motor already running. Callan helped Mara load 2 metal cases from the trunk. One of them had my name, on a tag, handwritten. I didn't remember packing anything. I didn't remember owning anything worth tagging. We pushed off and headed into open water. The sky turned a dull orange, and I caught my first glimpse of the island. It didn't look like a place anyone lived. The trees grew too thick. The shoreline was lined with black stone. As we got closer, I saw glass domes peeking out from the white canopy. Old solar panels, wind towers, everything looked overgrown but still alive. Mara caught my expression. It's not abandoned, it's hidden. When we docked, 2 more people met us. One had a facial structure so close to mine it felt like looking at a cousin I'd never met. No one spoke right away. They just nodded as if confirming something. A match. A memory. Mara led me down a narrow path, the trees closing around us. This used to be a research sanctuary, she said, built by the same people who created the gene therapy you found. I stopped walking. The Calix Protocol? She nodded. It was never shut down. They just moved it here. We reached a clearing. In the middle stood a small building, more lab than home. Inside, Mara pointed to a wall covered in photos. 7 people. One woman in particular caught my eye. Tall, pale skin, strong eyes. She looked nothing like the parents who raised me. But something in me knew. I whispered the word before I could stop myself. Mum, Mara answered quietly. She was one
of the first 7, and she died so you could live. The room smelled like dust and metal. Old machines lined the walls, half covered in tarps, their screens dim.
Mara handed me a tablet, already loaded with files. Some were documents, others videos. One of them was a grainy recording of a woman speaking to the camera. Her voice was calm. Her name, Dr. Elira Miles. My mother. I'm recording this in case we don't make it, she said. If you're watching this, Lena, they found you. She looked tired, hollow, but her eyes didn't waver. You were born immune to everything we thought was incurable.
Cancer, ALS, even synthetic viruses. Your body doesn't just fight disease, it rewrites it. She paused, as if trying to choose her next words carefully. We thought it was a gift, but to them it was a threat. Mara sat beside me, silent.
I kept watching. My mother talked about the second generation, children like me. She said we couldn't be controlled. Vaccines didn't affect us. Medication didn't change us. Even aging seemed to slow. They said it was unnatural, she said, that we broke the rules of life itself. I didn't realize I was crying until Mara handed me a cloth. I didn't take it. I just stared at the screen. The final seconds of the video burned into my mind. They'll try to turn the world against you, my mother said. But don't let them decide what your DNA means. You're not the experiment.
You're the evidence. I looked at Mara. Why didn't anyone tell me? She spoke softly.
You were smuggled out after the drone strike. They killed everyone they could track. The rest of us went dark. Callan entered the room, holding a small device. He handed it to me. This was hidden in your old med chip. Backup code, a full
genome imprint. I stared at it. Why me? Mara answered without blinking. Because you're the only one left who hasn't been altered, tracked, or turned into a weapon. You're still clean, and if Helix Corp finds that out, they'll
do anything to erase you. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere beyond the trees, a drone hummed low across the sky. It wasn't scanning, it was searching. We didn't sleep that night. Callan secured the perimeter. Mara worked at the main terminal, her fingers moving fast. I sat in silence, holding the genome device. It was smaller than I expected, just a thin chip, almost like a memory stick. It carried everything that made me different. Everything they feared. My mind kept returning to my mother's face, her voice, that final warning. At dawn, we moved to the uplink station. It was hidden beneath one of the older domes, buried under vines and dust. Callan powered up the system. The lights flickered, then held steady. Mara slid the chip into the console. We're not dumping everything, she said, just a fragment. Enough to prove it's real. I nodded. My chest felt tight. Not from fear, something else, a weight, the kind that comes when you know life won't return to normal. The file uploaded fast. The genome string pulsed across the screen. Mara routed it through 6 proxy servers, bouncing the signal across continents. The final destination, an open-source genetics hub used by research students. No firewalls, no editors, no way to stop it once it landed. Almost there, she whispered. The alert hit before the upload finished. A red flash across the screen. Inbound surveillance, elevation, low orbit, asset detected. Callan looked at me. They found your signal. Mara's voice dropped. We've got 60 seconds. My finger hovered above the button. One tap and everything changed. No going
back, no undoing. I thought of my mother, of the lives already lost. I thought of mine. Then I pressed it.
The screen went dark for a second, then confirmed. Transfer complete. A moment later, the power cut out. Emergency lights kicked on. From outside we heard the whine of engines, low, sharp, not helicopters, smaller, drones. I followed Mara and Callan through the back corridor. We knew the island wouldn't stay hidden now. We split up. That wasn't the plan, But there was no time to argue. I ran north toward the old service route. The ground shook behind me. Something hit the dome. As I reached the tree line, I looked back. Smoke was rising. The lab was gone. I didn't know if Mara or Callan had made it out. I didn't know if the world would believe what we sent, but one thing was certain: it was too late to turn back. I made it off the island using one of the emergency rafts. No engine, just a solar battery and a steering fin. I drifted for nearly a day before a contact boat picked me up. They wore the rebel mark, an old biohazard symbol scratched into metal, but their eyes told a different story. Too calm, too clean. They fed me, gave me dry clothes, no questions, no names. I should have known. We reached the safe house just before midnight. It was deep inland, tucked inside an abandoned hydro plant. I expected chaos, wires, radios, tension. Instead, it felt sterile. One man waited inside, long coat, trimmed beard. He smiled when he saw me. "You're the last," he said.
"They'll come hard now, but not for us, for you." They gave me a cot, told me to rest. I didn't. I stayed awake, listening.
Doors didn't creak. Voices stayed low. No one called anyone by name. That's when it clicked. These weren't rebels. They were something else. The next morning, the truth dropped. The man in the coat handed me a burner phone. It displayed a message: public health alert, unauthorized genome release linked to bioterror activity. They blamed me, said I was a threat to national security. Calyx Protocol was no longer a theory, it was a headline. The media twisted it. Government leaders called for emergency response. Stock markets crashed. Pharma giants panicked. I stared at the screen. "You leaked the location," I said. The man didn't argue. "You were always the risk." I turned to run, but the others were already blocking the door. Calm, professional. "We'll keep you alive," he said. "That's more than Helix Corp planned." I backed away. Why? His answer was soft. Control. If you're gone, the data becomes legend. If you're
alive, we decide how it's used.
I was never their hope. I was their leverage, a symbol they could dangle, a myth they could manage. That night, I escaped through a drainage shaft. I ran for hours, barefoot and bleeding. No phone, no food, no plan. Only one thing kept me moving. One final copy of the genome still inside me. Hidden not in a file, but in my blood. I stayed off the grid for weeks. Empty farms, cold shelters, always moving. The world above me spun into panic. People feared what they didn't understand. My face showed up on news feeds with words like carrier, mutation, threat. The rebels had gone silent. Helix Corp didn't make a statement. No CEO on camera, no press releases, just silence. But behind every talking head, blaming foreign labs or rogue scientists, I saw their signature, quiet, coordinated, precise. Behind every headline, every closed lab, I saw their hand. I kept one thing hidden, the final imprint. A dormant sequence encoded in my mitochondrial DNA. Callan had whispered it once before the raid. If everything falls, you can still finish it. You are the backup. I activated the code in a basement beneath an old library. No power, just a handheld sequencer and a solar charger. The program was simple, not a weapon, not a virus. It was a message, stitched into the shape of code, open source, fully traceable, impossible to erase. I embedded the genome edit into basic immune repair modules, tagged it with public health licenses, and scattered it. Peer-to-peer platforms, academic clouds, pirate networks, it moved fast. Within days, thousands had copies. Some thought it was a hoax, others knew it wasn't. I didn't do it to save the world. I wasn't a hero. I just wanted the truth to
live outside me. My body had been claimed, owned, controlled. Not anymore. I never saw Mara again. I don't know if she made it. Callan is likely dead. The rebel cell fractured, swallowed by its own secrecy.
Helix Corp will recover. Their empire runs deeper than headlines. But now the Phoenix strain is no longer a secret. It belongs to everyone. To no one. People ask if I'm afraid. Of being hunted. Of being studied. I'm not. I've disappeared.
From all records, no ID, no trace, not even a memory file left in the system. They erased my records, my name, my life, but not what's out there now, not what's been copied, downloaded, printed, passed along. I don't need a name anymore.
Just the truth. I was born to be erased. Now I am everywhere they can't reach. They called it an accident. But when I saw his name, I knew someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever heard about his cure. My name is Raphaelman. I've been a journalist for 16 years, most of them chasing the kinds of stories that never make the front page. I'm not a theorist. I don't wear tinfoil. I chase facts until the trail goes cold, and then I let them go. At least, that's how it used to work. I saw it by chance, a 2-paragraph obituary buried deep in the back pages of a local weekly. From Ohio, Dr. Leon Rusk, age 54, electrocuted in a lab mishap. It barely registered until the name clicked. Rusk. The biochemist who once claimed to reverse type 1 diabetes using recombinant protein folding. I'd interviewed him briefly 6 years ago, back when I still chased medical stories for the Ledger. He'd vanished not long after, bought out by a private wellness group and scrubbed from public view. The trail had gone cold, and I had shelved the story. Until now. There was no mention of his research, just a short line about surviving.
Relatives and a closed casket service. Something about that felt off. So I dug. His professional profiles were gone, scrubbed clean.
No LinkedIn, no conference appearances, no publications past 2019. But the patent registry still had his name on file, attached to a submission listed only as pending confidentiality clause. No published abstract, no technical notes, just a docket number and a closed tag. That was the beginning. Within a week I'd pulled 14 more names, scientists, researchers, inventors, each with sealed patents tied to quietly defunct shell companies. No offices, no staff, just legal filings and P.O. boxes. Some of them were dead, like Rusk. Others had simply disappeared, moved overseas, taken sabbaticals, changed names. One was listed as relocated for personal safety. The pattern was unmistakable and more chilling than I wanted to admit. My editor at Third Rail dismissed it when I pitched the angle, said it sounded paranoid. He even laughed. But when I checked the internal archive the next morning, my notes were gone. The draft folder had been wiped. Later that night, I found a message on my laptop, just one line, typed in courier font across a black background. There is no 1000. I didn't sleep. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if knowing the truth could kill you. I didn't find the list. It found me. 2 days after the message appeared on my screen, I received a link. No subject line, no sender, just a string of characters and a timestamp. I shouldn't have clicked it, but I did. It opened a stripped-down server page, a single downloadable file titled Archive 0199 CSV. I expected noise, junk data, maybe a trap. Instead, I found a spreadsheet with names, dates, patent numbers, and something worse. A column labeled Status. Each row listed a breakthrough, neurological regeneration, a non-opioid pain inhibitor, a universal antiviral compound. The status column was brutally consistent: closed, settled, deceased, relocated, unavailable. Out of 999 entries,
not one had reached the market. Not one inventor was traceable. I started verifying entries.
One by one, I cross-checked patent numbers with global registries. Most were marked as unpublished under confidentiality agreements. A few led to corporate acquisition notices, companies that had no websites, no products, no verifiable employees. One holding firm had bought 16 patents in a single fiscal quarter, all for different innovations, and all from scientists who had since left the industry. Another had purchased a liver regeneration therapy, then dissolved 6 weeks later. No press, no follow-up. I printed the list and stored copies offline. Every instinct told me to stop. But that part of my brain, the one that had driven me into journalism in the first place, kept asking the same question. Why buy these cures just to bury them? I didn't like the answers forming in my head. I tried to show it to a colleague, someone I trusted. He skimmed the first few rows and told
me I was overreacting. Said the format looked fake, like someone mocking conspiracy nuts.
The next morning, his phone was disconnected. His office door was locked. HR claimed he'd transferred to a field assignment. He never worked in the field. Later that day, my login credentials failed. My backup email account was gone. My personal medical records, which I'd accessed just the week before, now returned an error. Subject flagged. Restricted access. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a journalist. Something bigger was happening, someone was watching, and if there really was no number 1000, I had to find out why. I drove 6 hours to meet him. No calls, no texts, just a handwritten note slipped under my door with an address and the initials DK. I knew the name, Dr. Devin Kroll. He was rumored to have developed a neural repair algorithm a decade ago, something that could rebuild damaged brain tissue using adaptive signal patterns. The story disappeared when his lab caught fire. No one died, but Kroll walked away from academia and hadn't been seen since. When I arrived, his house looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Weathered siding, blinds drawn, a small mailbox duct-taped shut. I knocked once. Nothing. Knocked again. Still silence. I was about to leave when the door creaked open. He looked older than I expected, his hair grey and thin, skin drawn tight over his frame like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He didn't say hello. Just stared at me like he was reading a dossier only he could see. "You're the one digging up the list," he said flatly. I nodded. He let me in without another word. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and something sour. The walls were lined with printouts, graphs, medical scans, patent logs, all pinned in neat rows. It was like stepping into a bunker built from lost science. I asked about his algorithm. He denied everything at first. Said he'd never filed anything, never coded a thing. But when I pulled out a printed copy of the spreadsheet and showed him line 324, his name, patent ID, date of submission, he changed, not startled, resigned. He sank into a chair and rubbed his eyes. "They offered me enough money to disappear," he said. "Not to sell, to vanish. I took it, but I never
cashed it. I keep the check as a reminder." He opened a drawer and showed it to me. 8 figures, dated the same day his lab burned.
Before I could ask more, he stood up and walked to the window. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. "I've been quiet for years. But if they know we spoke—" He didn't finish the sentence. 3 days later, his house
exploded. Gas leak, they said. No foul play. But I knew better. He was patent 324, and now I was the only one left who knew why he was afraid. I didn't attend the funeral. There wasn't one.
No obituary, no service. Just a news brief about a gas explosion that leveled an old property outside Helena. I knew what it meant. Kroll had broken the silence, and someone made sure it wouldn't happen again. That night, I mapped every address, tied to the shell companies on the spreadsheet. Most were P.O. boxes. A few were registered to law firms that dissolved shortly after the patents were acquired. But one pattern kept repeating: an offshore entity listed as majority stakeholder in 32 of the closed patents. The name was always the same: Kalos Strategic Holdings. It sounded like a hedge fund. But when I tried to pull business filings, I hit a wall. Luxembourg, Malta, Singapore. Each jurisdiction protected its records behind layers of red tape and attorney-client privilege. No board member names, no contact information, no business history, just annual reports showing year-over-year growth with zero declared income. It didn't make sense unless profit wasn't the point. Control was. I started working backward, pulling the corporate registry data on every dissolved company that sold to Kalos. Most had been created months before the patent acquisition, then folded within weeks. The legal trails were flawless, no overlaps, no conflicts. It was a system built for one purpose: erasure. Still something cracked. In a PDF export from a dissolved holding firm's financial report, I found a redacted section left partially visible in the table of contents. The line read Quarterly Licensing Allocation, VPS. VPS. I ran the acronym against every patent entry and found a second match, this time in the metadata of a scanned inventor agreement someone had forgotten to encrypt. The footer read VPS structure term, indefinite perpetual silence clause. That was the key. These weren't simple buyouts. They were engineered silences, legally enforced disappearances disguised as acquisitions. By then, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt too quiet, my devices too loud. A neighbor mentioned someone knocking on my door while I was out. I hadn't told anyone where I lived. I wiped my drives, moved hotels every 2 nights, and used public terminals to research. One thing was clear, Kalos wasn't hiding a product. They were burying possibilities. And if I wanted the truth, I'd have to go deeper than the paperwork. It started with a routine visit to the clinic. I'd been skipping meals, losing weight. My hands shook and my vision blurred at odd hours. I told myself it was stressful. The doctor didn't even get through the intake form. He glanced at his screen, frowned, and left the room. 5 minutes later, a nurse returned and said they couldn't treat me. No reason given, just a quiet apology and a request that I leave immediately. When I pressed, she leaned close and whispered one word: flagged. Back at my hotel, I tried logging into my insurance portal. Access denied. I called the help desk. After a pause, the line went dead. I checked my cloud backups. Gone. Every note, every copy of the spreadsheet, deleted. That night, I found my laptop camera activated. The light blinked once, then turned off. I covered it with tape and powered down everything. I reached out to 2 former colleagues, people I trusted. One had retired early, moved out of the country without notice. The other answered on the first ring, but her voice was distant. "Rafi," she said, "don't call me again." Then silence. I checked public records on whistleblowers who had gone dark in the past 10 years. One had been institutionalized, another ruled legally incompetent. After a closed hearing, I started to wonder if I was next. My paranoia became practical. I bought burner phones, paid cash, used public Wi-Fi only. Still I could feel it. Cameras turning. People watching too long. In one airport, security pulled me aside. Not for a weapon or contraband, but because my name had triggered a systems
alert. They wouldn't say why. I was questioned for over an hour, then released without explanation. Later that night, I opened a clean laptop and found a new message sitting in a folder I hadn't created. It was a still image.
A screenshot of my mother's old university ID badge, Biomedical Engineering Department, dated 1981. At the bottom was a line of code I didn't recognize. I scanned it and matched it to the first entry in the spreadsheet, patent Blatsuwaro 1. I stared at the screen, not breathing. My mother had died when I was 17. Cancer, they said. But that was before I knew how things were buried. I spent the next day combing through old boxes in my father's garage. He'd passed 2 years ago, and I hadn't touched the storage since. Most of it was junk: holiday cards, tools, dusty photo albums. But in the bottom of a sealed plastic container, beneath layers of notebooks and teaching materials, I found a file labeled Grant Archives, E.M. Ellman. My mother's initials. Inside were lab reports, draft abstracts, and typed correspondence with a private research foundation I'd never heard of. The subject line repeated across every page: autonomous tissue regeneration via synthetic protein looping. The last letter was dated March 5th, 1986. She died a month later. The tone was formal, but something in her phrasing felt urgent. She wrote of unexpected recovery rates and unanticipated molecular harmonics. One line stopped me cold. They want to bypass review and lock this down. If I don't sign, it all disappears. The letter was addressed to someone named L. Norval. I searched the name, nothing current, but a few hits in archived academic papers from the late 70s. Then I found it. A defunct biomedical shell company from 1987, registered for 5 months before dissolving. The sole listed director? El Norval. Her death certificate had always bothered me. Now I looked again. The attending physician's name wasn't in any medical registry. The hospital told me he was a temporary contractor. No digital trace. No license record. Nothing. It was as if the man who signed her death didn't exist. I scanned everything, notes, reports, letters, and uploaded it to a decentralized server. I encrypted and mirrored the data across nodes I couldn't trace myself. If something happened to me, the files would live. It wouldn't prove everything, but it would be harder to ignore. That night, I remembered something she used to say when she thought I wasn't listening. You can write a cure, but it doesn't
matter if someone buys the pen. I knew I couldn't go to the press. I tried that once. My editor had buried the pitch, deleted the files, and locked me out of the system. The mainstream wouldn't touch it.
Not with the words confidential patent and medical disappearance in the same sentence. So I turned to the only people who might listen, those who no longer trusted the system. I uploaded the spreadsheet to 3 decentralized forums, each with different encryption keys. I stripped my name from the metadata and replaced it with a phrase I hadn't forgotten since that first message. There is no 1000. Within hours, it spread, slowly at first, then in sudden bursts. Independent researchers started cross-referencing the patent IDs. Digital sleuths traced shell corporations and connected them to known pharma lobbyists. A few small podcasts picked it up. Then the bots arrived, waves of them. Accounts calling it a hoax, flooding every thread with fake documents, false corrections, and doctored counter data. Deep-fake videos surfaced, showing me saying things I never said. One had me admitting it was performance
art.
Another had me ranting, unhinged, in front of a green screen. None of them used my real voice. But that didn't matter. Public response split. Half dismissed it as noise. The other half wasn't sure what to believe. I watched the narrative fracture in real time. My name trended, then vanished. Articles appeared, then were taken down. The spreadsheet was mirrored to blockchain-based servers, each copy slightly different, encoded with unique watermarks. Some users started building timelines, others tracked the inventors. A few found archived footage of those who had vanished. In every case, the pattern held breakthrough acquisition silence. I stayed offline after the first 48 hours. I changed hotels again. I watched the news without sound, waiting for a sign that it mattered. None came. But something shifted. In a protest overseas, someone held a sign that read 999 cures missing. A graffiti tag in Berlin echoed the phrase, and in a subreddit buried under layers of encryption, one user wrote, "If treatment is eternal, then silence is currency." 3 months later, a junior analyst at a non-profit resigned quietly and leaked trial data for a shelved leukemia therapy. He cited the spreadsheet. No one mentioned my name, that wasn't the point. They never caught me, but I stopped being Raffi Ellman. I became a name tied to a list. No book deal, no exposé, just a file they couldn't erase. Sometimes legacy isn't
about being heard, it's about being found.
I thought it was a printer's mark until I saw it burned into human skin. I've always preferred the silence of libraries to the noise of the living. My work is simple, methodical. I trace language across centuries, pulling threads from manuscripts most people will never touch. So when I opened De Corpore Morbis, a 16th century medical codex misfiled in the back of the Bodleian's climate vault, I was expecting nothing more than mildew and miscataloguing. Instead, I found a symbol scorched into the leather spine, tucked where only restoration notes belong. A perfect spiral intersected by a cruciform slash, seared deep as if cauterized. It looked ancient, deliberate, yet unfamiliar. I assumed it was a binder's curiosity or an apprentice's flourish. I made a note and forgot it. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the Italian consulate. A pharmaceutical lab outside Zurich had burned down. Arson was suspected. One body recovered, no ID, but the authorities wanted help analyzing ink residues on fragments found near the body, text embedded in synthetic polymers. They said my name had come from an advisor at the
University of Lausanne. That was strange. I don't work in criminal forensics, but curiosity has a way of bending my rules. I flew in.
The cadaver was barely recognizable, but the left scapula was untouched, pale, unburned, like porcelain. Etched just below the shoulder blade was the same sigil I'd found in the codex, spiral, cross, cauterized into skin. Not ink, scar tissue. I froze. There was no reason a 16th century printer's symbol should appear on a 21st century corpse, unless it wasn't a printer's symbol. The forensic pathologist didn't seem surprised. He called it a branding, said he'd seen something similar once in a morgue in Bruges. I asked if he remembered the file. He didn't. Said it vanished from the database 3 days later. I left Switzerland the next morning. But something had shifted. I kept picturing the symbol, seeing it behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I wasn't sleeping well. And then the email arrived. No subject, no signature, just a photo. A man's body, face down in the nave of Santa Croce in Florence. Throat cut. In his mouth, a page of parchment. 14th century. Margins marked in blood. And there it was again, the sigil, waiting for me. The church was colder than it should have been for late spring. Marble echoed every footstep as I moved down the nave, the scent of beeswax and decay clinging to the air. The Florentine authorities had already cleared the scene, but I was allowed access thanks to a favour from a colleague at Sapienza. The body had been removed. What remained was the blood, soaked into the stones like ink into vellum, and the parchment. It had been preserved, sealed in evidence, then quietly passed to me, without fanfare or explanation. The page was fragile, but intact. 14th century, likely from the second plague wave. I recognized the script immediately, Lombardic cursive, common among Italian apothecaries. But the ink wasn't iron gall or lamp black. Under UV light, it shimmered faintly violet, with a compound I couldn't place. The sigil was scrawled into the lower margin, not drawn, but pressed, embedded like a watermark. And along the edge, something stranger. A sequence of characters, not in any known language. Not Latin, not Greek. I took photos and sent them to a retired cryptographer I trusted. He replied within the hour. not a language, a cipher, possibly biological in structure.
I didn't know what that meant. Yet, the dead man in Santa Croce wasn't some drifter.
His name was Dr. Gabriele Asturi, head of molecular analytics at a biotech subsidiary of a major pharmaceutical firm. No family, no digital footprint beyond academic publications. All his research had been locked down since the lab fire. I reached out to former colleagues. Most didn't respond. One did. A quiet voice on a secure line told me that Asturi had been studying extremophile microbes, ancient ones, samples traced back to preserved specimens from 14th century medical caches, the same era as the parchment. The project was called Flora V, short for Flora vivens, living plant. A microbial compound extracted from a botanical ecosystem, thought to have gone extinct during the Black Death. I asked where the samples came from. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "They weren't found, they were passed down through families." That night I pulled out the codex again. My fingers traced the sigil on the leather spine. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a mark.
A lineage. Something told me I was part of it. I flew to Rome under a false pretense, consulting on a manuscript of the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana.
It wasn't a lie exactly. I had requested access months ago before any of this began. Now I used that access to search for something very specific. Plague-era physician logs, especially from northern Italy. The librarian was polite but distracted. He guided me through the dim reading room, past scholars buried in centuries of silence. When I asked for restricted collections, he hesitated, then handed me a paper slip. Vault 6B, 30 minutes. No explanation, no record. Vault 6B sat behind a locked steel gate 2 floors below ground. A single bulb hummed overhead, casting soft shadows across the shelves. The documents smelled of cedar and dust. I scanned the index until one entry caught my eye. Itinerarium Sanitatis, 1351, author listed as unknown. Bound in buckram, brittle but legible. The final folios were filled with erratic scrawlings and fragmented Latin, far from the neat medicinal.
Notes at the beginning.
But one page was different. A drawing, inked with precision, showed a figure in a plague mask beside a flowering tree. Not symbolic, botanical, real. The branches bore a specific arrangement of leaves and spores. Beside it, in red ink, Curatio ex vivo. Hidden, not lost. I copied every word, every symbol. And there it was again, in the corner margin, faint and incomplete. The sigil. This time, paired with a name I didn't expect to see. Leclerc. My own. I stared at it for a long time. The script wasn't clear, but it implied something disturbing. A doctor fleeing a village carrying a scroll. A decision made to bury something too powerful to trust. My great-grandmother's records were spotty. She came from the Jura Mountains, was trained as a midwife, and vanished during the war. No death certificate, no grave. I had assumed she'd fled or died in hiding. But this scroll suggested otherwise. Before I left the archive, I requested digital scans of the manuscript. The archivist didn't blink. He only asked for my name again. When I gave it, he looked up from his ledger. "You've come far," he said, "but not far enough." That night, I found the first tracker under my hotel door. A listening device, active. I left Rome before sunrise, taking only a backpack and a burner phone. My laptop was wiped, SIM removed. The device under my door had been transmitting on a closed frequency used by medical telemetry networks. Someone was listening through infrastructure built for patient monitoring. That wasn't random. It was intentional. Someone with access, someone inside. I booked a one-way ticket to Geneva using a friend's credentials. By the time I landed, my university email was locked. My credentials failed. My files, decades of research, were gone. I tried calling my department head, straight to voicemail. Then came a system alert from my encrypted storage. External access detected, location unknown. Within minutes, the server went dark. Everything erased. I stayed in a quiet guest house off the Rue de l'Athénée, avoiding hotels, cafes, anywhere. With cameras, I slept in clothes, lights off. When I checked my phone the next morning, I found only one message waiting. It was audio, distorted, a man's voice, slow and calm. You are searching for something designed to stay hidden. You are not the first. You won't be the last. Turn back. I didn't. Instead, I followed the only lead I had left. A name, buried in the Vatican registry next to my great-grandmother's, Anton Zan, a field physician and botanist stationed in Provence during the second outbreak. His journals, thought lost, had been partially recovered and stored in the archives of a private medical museum in Lyon. I arrived 2 days later under a false surname. A sympathetic curator let me in after hours. The journal was fragmented, water-damaged, but legible. Zan described a compound derived from a moss that grew only in an isolated microclimate near Mont Ventoux. He called it Vita lignum, the living wood. According to his notes, it halted infection in every trial, but then the records stopped. Abruptly, the last entry was a list of names. Most were crossed out. At the bottom, transfer complete. Bloodline Z activated. My pulse quickened. The phrase didn't feel historical. It felt operational. As I left the museum, I spotted a man across the street. Same coat, same face, 3 cities in a row. He wasn't hiding anymore. I was being followed. I didn't run. Running confirms fear, and fear is traceable. Instead, I walked 2 blocks, ducked into a pharmacy, and left through the rear exit. My tracker didn't follow. That night, I checked into a new place under a different alias. No electronics, no lights. I kept my back to the wall and waited. He found me anyway. Just after 3 a.m., a knock, 3 quick taps, followed by a pause.
I said nothing. Then a voice, low and dry, spoke through the door.
You're not wrong, Mara, but you're not safe either. Let me in, or the others will find you first. Against all instinct, I opened the door. He looked ordinary. Late 50s, thin build, no visible weapon. But his eyes were sharp, focused, in a way I recognized from intelligence briefings I was never supposed to see. He introduced himself as Ellis, a former member of what he called the Inner Archive. A historian by title, but his real role had been curation, selecting which findings reached the public and which were erased. He poured 2 glasses of tap water and waited for my question. I asked why the scrolls were hidden. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. because power without control is chaos. Antibiotics began with good intent. Then came resistance, overuse, profit. What happens when one cure can undo all of it in a single generation? I told him that wasn't their decision to make. He didn't argue, he only nodded. That's why we split. Half of us believed the cure should be preserved. The others believed it should be released, selectively, quietly, to reset the system. But then people started dying. Researchers, archivists, entire labs wiped out. The preservation side won, the rest of us disappeared. I asked him why he came to me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a vial. Inside, a speck of something suspended in a clear fluid. This is a fraction, enough to verify the compounds. Sequence. You need proof, not faith. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. But they know who you are, and they think your family betrayed them. That means they won't let you leave Europe alive. He stood. You've got 3 days.
After that, they closed the circuit. I left Lion before sunrise, carrying the vial in a lead-lined case tucked deep inside my coat.
My plan was simple. Vanish, analyze the sample, then decide what came next. But simplicity doesn't hold under pressure. Hours later, my backup phone lit up with a single text. University disavowal confirmed. Mentor ill. Status red. No. Sender ID. Encrypted. But the cipher matched a symbol I'd seen in the scroll's margin. Bloodline Z's internal code. Someone on the inside was watching, or helping, maybe both. I travelled south by train, avoiding airports, cameras, and
names. I slept in slivers between stations.
In Marseille I found what I needed, a forgotten lab space used decades ago by Médecins Historiques, a non-profit once funded to catalogue pre-modern therapeutics. Most of the equipment was gone, but the fundamentals remained. I ran the compound against multiple bacterial strains. Even diluted, the effect was immediate. Colonies collapsed. No residue, no damage to surrounding cells. It didn't kill indiscriminately, it selected. It was surgical. I sat there for hours, unmoving, waiting to feel something like triumph. Instead, I felt dread. If this leaked, medicine would fracture, antibiotics would vanish overnight, farmers would crash, emergency rooms would be paralyzed by chaos, counterfeit treatments, black market dosages.
Millions might survive. Millions might die. It would all depend on who got there first. I slept beneath the counter, the vial cradled in one hand. In my dream, my great-grandmother stood at the edge of a burning village, scroll in her arms, smoke in her eyes. She didn't run, she made a choice. I woke to the hiss of compressed air.
A heavy gas slid beneath the door, sweet, synthetic. My arms went numb before I could stand. Shadows entered. One knelt beside me. A gloved hand tilted my chin. The woman's voice was soft, almost maternal. The cure isn't yours to release. It never was. She held up a photo, blurred, charred, but I knew the face. My grandmother, mid-40s, standing beside a crate marked Z. The label beneath, Operation Containment. Bloodline Z, 1943. The pain didn't come from the gas. It came from the realization. I hadn't discovered the scroll. I'd inherited it. I surfaced slowly, senses returning one at a time. My wrists were bound with cloth, not metal. The room was sterile, white walls, humming lights, no windows. The air smelled like ozone and something faintly floral. I was in a containment site, not a prison. Across from me sat the woman in the grey coat. She studied me with the kind of calm that didn't require threats. On the table between us, the vial sat untouched. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you believe your family made the wrong choice?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes, or no, or anything definitive, but I couldn't. She placed a folder beside the vial and slid it across. Inside were surveillance photos of me, of Ellis, of the lab, the manuscript, and one final page, the scroll, fully digitized, logged into a secure system only accessible through Bloodline Z's archive. They hadn't destroyed it. They wanted it buried again, hidden. But something in me cracked open. "They used to call it preservation," she said, as if reading my mind. "Control through containment. Our creed was simple. Humanity survives when it doesn't know what it could misuse." I looked up. And now? Now we're split. Some believe the world is ready. Others know it isn't. You were the test case. When they released me, I didn't flee. I went home, not to my flat, but to my mentor's place. He was pale, recovering slowly. I showed him the folder. He didn't flinch, just asked what I planned to do. I told him I already had. 3 days earlier, I'd uploaded everything. The genome sequence, microbial interactions, encrypted translations, into a decentralized bioresearch platform. Not a press leak, a peer-reviewed open-source drop, irreversible, trace-proof. By the time they realized, it was too late. Labs were already replicating the findings. Pharmaceutical markets staggered, patents collapsed. Quietly, a new world began to stir. Now I exist in the margins. No name, no address. Just fragments of my life buried in transit logs and erased boarding passes. Sometimes I catch news of anonymous discoveries, silent revolutions, whispered.
Cures. Bloodline Z feared chaos. They called it mercy. But the real threat wasn't the cure. It was that someone finally chose to share it.
They told us we were chosen to heal the world, but on the first day they made us swear never to cure it. The Arcadia Institute sat tucked inside a hillside estate outside Geneva, surrounded by glass gardens and biometric gates. We called it a sanctuary, a crucible for the best minds in global health policy. But Arcadia wasn't about healing, it was about control. I should have known that the moment I took the oath, standing barefoot on polished stone with 12 others, each of us handed an unmarked file and a single phrase to memorize. First, do no cure. It was said calmly, almost casually, as though it were an inside joke. Only later did I realize it wasn't a joke at all. That first semester felt like any elite program, clinical rotations, genomics labs, simulation drills. But under the surface, something was always off. We didn't study ethics, we studied narrative engineering. We weren't taught how to publish, we were taught how to bury data under layers of statistical ambiguity. The real curriculum unfolded in the off hours, in after-dinner seminars that weren't listed on any schedule. That's where I first heard Dr. Lyra Marek speak. She wasn't just a researcher, she was a fixer. The kind of person who knew how to make bad results disappear, who could manipulate public health responses like market trends. She called it epidemiological theatre. I remember her exact words. Public health isn't about truth, it's about timing. That stuck with me. It should have scared me. But back then, I was too ambitious to feel fear. I just wanted in, wanted the access, the clearance, the illusion of doing something important. The final test wasn't a paper or an exam. It was an interview in a windowless room with a single question. If a cure collapses the economy, do you still release it? I gave the answer they wanted, not the one I believed. That's how I got assigned to Genovex International. That's how I earned clearance to Vault Theta. And that's where I found D23, an antiviral that could have ended entire disease classes overnight. I thought I'd discovered hope. I didn't realize I'd just signed my own death certificate. Vault Theta wasn't marked on any map. It didn't have a door, just a retinal scanner tucked behind a sliding wall in Genovex's West Wing. My clearance was provisional, granted by Dr. Marek herself, and only after a 2-month evaluation. She said I was ready. I wasn't sure if she meant for the research or the weight of what came with it. The vault was climate-controlled, windowless and silent. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old servers and antiseptic. Rows of glass. Cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling, each marked with barcodes and redacted trial codes. Everything inside was classified. Everything inside had worked too well. I wasn't alone the first time I entered. A systems engineer shadowed me, logging each terminal interaction. No portable devices allowed, no pens, no paper, no drives. We were watched through a one-way mirror. I was told not to speak. Just observe. That's when I found Protocol D23. Its folder sat 2 shelves down from a failed Zika inhibitor, unremarkable in appearance but flagged with a note. Application lethal to corporate continuity. Archive indefinitely. The language wasn't scientific, it was economic. The data told a different story. Animal trials showed full viral suppression across 31 known pathogens with no sign of resistance or toxicity. The compound didn't just work. It erased viral load entirely within 48 hours. I cross-checked the results twice, then again. The trials were real. The compound was real. The decision to bury it was also real. I brought it up carefully in our next review session. Dr.
Marek didn't flinch. She leaned back, sipped her espresso and said, "Cures destabilize. Markets depend on maintenances." Then she changed the subject to investor risk assessments. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through the implications. Every breakthrough I'd ever
studied was suddenly suspect. What else had been buried? Who decided what lived and died in the name of market stability? The next day, I stayed late. Synthesized a microdose of D23 using archived instructions. I had no plan, just one name, one child, one chance to prove that the truth still mattered. My nephew was terminal. 2 weeks, they'd said.
I wasn't going to let him die, not if I could help it, not without trying. I told them it was a vitamin blend. That's how I got it into the room. No hospital board would have approved An experimental antiviral, not without trials, not for...
A child already labelled palliative, but they didn't question me. My badge still carried weight then, and my sister trusted me. I didn't tell her what it was. I couldn't. She was too tired, too hollowed out by months of waiting for the inevitable. Her son, Liam, was only 7. His skin had gone pale, lungs barely holding pressure. They kept saying the words comfort care, as if he wasn't still breathing. I administered the dose by IV. It was colourless, odourless, a clear compound that disappeared into the saline line like it belonged. I stayed the night pretending to sleep in the corner chair. Every hour I checked his vitals. By morning, the fever was gone. By noon, his oxygen levels had normalized. By the end of the second day, he sat up in bed and asked for toast. The doctors called it a spontaneous rebound, a miracle. But I knew better. The compound worked. It didn't suppress symptoms. It eradicated the cause. I thought I could keep it quiet. 1 dose, 1 patient, nothing traceable, but something flagged. A nurse scanned the infusion logs, noticed a lot of numbers that didn't match inventory. She reported it. A quiet inquiry began. Then came the audit. It didn't take them long. My credentials were already under surveillance since my Vault Theta clearance. They found the synthetic batch signature, found the security timestamp from the lab. I knew I was exposed when my login stopped working. My apartment access was denied. Genevex locked me out before I even left the hospital. No warning, no hearing, just silence. The next day, I saw the first drone. It hovered outside my building, silent, unmarked. Then my bank cards failed, my inbox emptied. A news alert pinged my phone. Gene editing scandal, doctor under investigation for unauthorized trials. They used my full name. They used my
face. And just like that, I wasn't a physician anymore. I was a fugitive. My only crime was saving a child. But to them it was treason. It started with small things. My badge stopped scanning. Then my Genevex email returned errors. By noon, my medical license had been flagged for review. That night, my name vanished from the Arcadia alumni directory. Even my residency records at St. Harlow's disappeared. It was as if I had never practiced medicine, as if I had never existed. I tried calling Marek. The line rang twice, then dropped. When I called again, it went straight to voicemail. I left. A message, short, careful. I didn't mention the drug, just said I needed to speak in person. She never called back. I packed a bag, left my apartment without turning on the lights. The drone had returned, hovering just high enough to pretend it wasn't watching. I ducked into the alley, took a route through back streets and paid cash for a cheap room 2 cities away. The news hit harder the next day. A headline on a national stream, Bioterror suspect linked to lab breach. They said I had engineered a viral agent, claimed I was part of a rogue genetic faction pushing untested compounds into vulnerable populations. They used terms like public threat and national alert. I watched the segment twice. They'd spliced my voice from old interviews into new contexts, made it sound like I had confessed. Even the photos were wrong, older, sharper, almost theatrical. I turned off the screen and sat in silence. My phone buzzed once. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct took over. "Aidan," the voice said,
low and clear. "They've activated the burn protocol. You need to move, now." I didn't ask who it was. I recognized her. Nia Kwan. She'd dropped out of Arcadia 2 years before graduation. Rumors said she'd disappeared into the underground health networks. Some claimed she died. Others said she was building something.
Off-grid. I asked where we could meet. She gave me coordinates and told me to destroy the phone.
I hesitated, then snapped it in half and flushed the SIM. Within the hour, I was gone. No ID, no cards. Just cash and a name the system hadn't learned yet. Whatever came next, I wouldn't survive it as Dr. Aiden Voss. That name was already dead. I reached Iceland under a borrowed identity. A cargo freighter had taken me from Rotterdam to Seyðisfjörður, when Nia's contact met me at the dock with thermal gear and a wordless nod. We drove inland for hours, past empty fields and frozen rivers until the road vanished into snow. From there, we hiked. The air was sharp and my lungs burned with every breath, but I didn't complain. I was lucky to be breathing at all. We reached the outpost at dusk. It looked like an abandoned weather station, metal siding, no signage, no visible power source. Inside, it was warm, clean. Rows of equipment buzzed quietly. Solar batteries lined the far wall. The lab was small but functional, and it was alive. People moved with quiet urgency, faces half lit by blue monitors. Nia stepped forward, pulled back her hood, and studied me. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked with frost. "You still believe in the system?" she asked. I didn't answer. She didn't wait. "Good. That means you're useful." Over the next hour, I showed her the D-23. Synthesis logs walked her through the protocol, the gene vector, the payload design. She already knew the basics. Said she'd heard whispers from other vaults, cures shelved for market stability, treatments erased before reaching review. "We're not trying to save the world," she said. "We're trying to give people the tools to save themselves." Her team was building an open-source biolab. No patents, no ownership, no gatekeeping. Everything published, everything replicable. I uploaded the encrypted formula in fragments. They embedded it into innocuous genome tutorials, compressed it into chemical notation sheets, hid it in educational materials distributed across darknet forums and mirrored nodes. The plan wasn't to broadcast, it was to decentralize, make it impossible to erase. But it came at a cost. Genovex noticed. Within a week, the compound was flagged as contraband in 5 countries. By the second week, governments had passed emergency legislation criminalizing its possession. Health agencies called it unvetted, unsafe. Meanwhile, recovery cases spread underground. Patients cured quietly, anonymously. It wasn't enough to stop the machine, but it was enough to scare it. We'd sent a signal. The cure existed, and it was out. They took me in Reykjavik. No warning. 1 minute I was walking back from a supply drop. The next I was on the ground, face pressed to ice. No insignia. No words. Just 4 figures in matte black gear, a van without plates, and a needle in my neck. I woke to steel walls and silence. The room was sterile, no windows, no furniture beyond the chair I was strapped to. The light above me pulsed softly, like it was breathing. I wasn't sure how long I'd been out. Could have been hours. Could have been days. They didn't ask questions at first. They showed me a screen, footage of clinics using D23, of people recovering, of packets bearing my metadata buried inside open-source sequencing tools. Then they turned off the screen and left me alone. That was the pattern. Noise, then nothing. Sensory disorientation, chemical distortion, a method to erase more than memory. They weren't trying to find the formula. They already had it. They wanted to know who else I'd told, what I hadn't published. But I hadn't kept anything for myself. Before I left Iceland, I'd fragmented the last build of D23 into hash-encoded sequences and distributed them across decentralized biology forums mirrored to public code repositories with innocuous file names. A scheduled release triggered by my failure to check in. If I disappeared, the pieces would activate. And they had. On the 5th day, if it was day, Dr. Merrick appeared. She looked composed, untouched by time. "You could have walked away," she said. "You were one of us." I didn't reply. She circled the room, calm, almost casual. Then she made her offer. Renounce the formula, record a statement claiming it was fraudulent and I'd be given a new identity. Clean slate. I asked what would happen if I refused. She said nothing, just stared, expression flat. "And this is the last name you'll ever have." That was the end. I don't remember what they gave me, chemical or digital, but when I woke again, I was gone. Not dead, just dispersed. Because in their arrogance, they forgot one thing. You can't delete what's already been copied. Now fragments of me live in every reformatted cure, every bootlegged protocol, every whispered signature that starts with D23. They thought they'd buried me. All they did was broadcast me. They issued the death notice 2 days after my scheduled release. A brief classified memo circulated within Genovex security protocols. Dr. Aidan Voss, deceased in custody following internal containment breach. Status closed. No body, no incident report. Just a terminated profile and a memory scrub across key systems. To the world, I never existed, but outside their systems I was still moving, quietly, deliberately, because before they took me, I made sure the cure wouldn't need me anymore. Protocol D23 was out, disguised as academic material, scattered in small parts across research hubs, student networks and encrypted biology archives. No central node, no master file, just 1,000 pieces waiting to be assembled by anyone with enough knowledge and desperation to try. And they did. The first reassembly came from a small biotech co-op in Uruguay. They posted anonymized results, patients with terminal infections recovering without relapse, no sponsor, no official trials, just outcomes. The forums lit up. Within weeks, similar reports followed from Nairobi, Osaka, Helsinki. Independent labs were reconstructing D23 from fragments, verifying its sequence, testing it in the margins where regulation couldn't reach. Governments pushed back fast. Emergency legislation classified the formula as unlicensed gene therapy. Health agencies issued coordinated statements calling it dangerous, unvalidated, experimental. But the data didn't lie. Too many had seen it work. Too many had been saved. And once the pattern was visible, the narrative began to crack. No one knew who created the compound. There was no single author, no name on the papers, just digital footprints, aliases, annotations, trace signatures embedded deep in the code. Sometimes they referenced me. D23 Aiden started appearing in metadata, sometimes as a tag, sometimes just a quiet thanks. I didn't respond, I couldn't. That version of me, Dr. Aiden Voss, was gone. But I read every one. Nia still moves the network. Quiet hands in quiet places. She says, people have stopped waiting for permission. That's what matters. Not the formula. Not the scandal. The shift. That moment when people stopped believing the cure had to come from above. They tried to erase a name. What they did was spark a movement. The oath is broken, and no one will ever swear it again. The cure wasn't discovered in a lab. It was hidden in plain sight, wrapped in obsolete patents, and buried like a secret someone never wanted found. It started on a Tuesday. I'm Samir Rao. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. Caffeine, bug fixes, and broken node alerts were all I knew that week. Our project, CureCoin, had just gone into public beta. We were building a blockchain platform that could tokenize medical research and liberate dormant pharmaceutical patents. Most of it was automated by machine learning scrapers and smart contract filters. So when an old 1994 insulin synthesis patent was flagged as a high-entropy data cluster, I almost ignored it. But the file wasn't noise. It looked like code pretending not to be code. Deeply embedded, too perfect. My co-founder dismissed it. Artifact compression, maybe a checksum echo. I couldn't let it go. I ran it through a custom decryption loop. What came out stunned me. A full biochemical protocol for reversing type 1 diabetes. I assumed it was fake. Still, I submitted it under an alias to a third-party lab using a burner wallet. 2 weeks later, the results came back. The reversal markers were real. Verified in vitro. No anomalies. I read the report 5 times. Then I posted the formula publicly. Open source. Embedded in a crypto-backed app that rewarded downloads and verification cycles. We called it the CureCoin protocol. The response was instant. Posts from Istanbul, Sao Paulo, Manila. Screenshots of flatlined glucose monitors. Kids off insulin. Patients discharged early. No hype, no campaign. Just the truth spreading itself. We built nothing viral, only a protocol that worked. That was the high point. Before the accidents, before the disappearances, before the silence. At first, I didn't see the pattern. A car crash in Jakarta. A young developer in Lisbon found dead from sudden cardiac arrest. I recognized her handle. She'd pushed the earliest fork of the CureCoin plugin and published a guide others copied. The obituary barely mentioned her work, but her final commit caught my attention. She'd added security filters, and in her commit notes she wrote, "New RX overlap, silent injection detected, watch the seed redirect." New RX. I'd seen that name once. A pharmaceutical shell company, maybe a holding firm, nothing concrete. Curious, I ran a checksum trace across our latest build. That's when I found it. Silent commits, unlogged injections, redirect calls embedded deep. Not to CureCoin, to servers I didn't recognize. The next day, our lead developer disappeared. No messages, no logs. His wallet went dark. Servers began glitching. Users messaged me about weird behavior, glitched interfaces, missing wallet, balances, QR codes that led to dead pages. Then came the Mumbai raid. One of our mirror nodes was seized at 4 a.m. No warrant. Just gone. I watched the logs die mid-packet, as if the machine had never existed. CureCoin wasn't just flagged, it was being hunted. They didn't hit us with lawsuits, they hit our wallets. My crypto accounts were frozen, not stolen, just locked. When I tried to get access, the response was automated. Account activity under compliance review. No. Path to appeal. No explanation. My VPN began showing geolocation anomalies. My secure laptop logged a login attempt from cities I'd never visited. I wiped everything. Bought a burner. Still, a delivery guy called me by name even though I'd used a pseudonym. On the subway, someone leaned in and whispered, "You should have left the insulin buried." I didn't answer. Then came the whistleblower drop. It arrived in an unsigned, encrypted message, a new RX strategy brief, complete with internal memos, redacted minutes, and digital forensics plans. I'll never forget the margins of one memo. CureCoin represents a critical threat to medical revenue continuity. Beneath it, scrawled by hand, "Diabetes is more profitable managed than cured. Do not let the protocol scale." I read it 3 times. Then I packed my bag and disappeared. I went dark. New cities every week. No devices. Just notebooks, burner IDs, and fragments of code I memorized. CureCoin was bleeding. Nodes were vanishing. Handlers, what we started calling the volunteers who hosted, forked, and verified the protocol, went silent one by one. The media turned next. Biomalware protocol linked to patient deaths. My face appeared on global feeds. Bioterror. Suspect Samir Rao. I watched from a broken hostel TV. My name was gone, replaced with labels I couldn't shake. But the cure wouldn't die. I found the new nodes, graffiti QR tags, embedded firmware, even torrent files labeled as music, albums. One fork ran silently from inside a used smartwatch. It was raw now, stripped of any UI, just executable math. But people still used it. Kids were still waking up, insulin-free. That's when I saw the leak. A new RX directive. Frame originator as extremist actor. Deploy narrative bioterrorism. Trigger cyber sanitation teams. They weren't trying to discredit me anymore. They were preparing to erase me. I found refuge in Thessaloniki. A market kid slipped me a paper with a QR code. It led to a low-frequency mesh node. Inside, the latest build, renamed Ghost Signal V1.7. Someone out there still believed. We reformed, quietly. We seeded new versions through satellite-agnostic firmware. Books with hidden links, street art with embedded hashes. The protocol wasn't an app now, it was folklore. A signal passed from coder to medic to stranger. Then came Istanbul. I walked past a checkpoint. My face flashed red on a security screen. Category red, bioterror asset. Do not engage. Report immediately. I didn't blink. I walked straight through a contractor's exit. They'd lost control of the protocol, but they hadn't lost me. We had one chance left. Months earlier, I'd been bribed to access a dormant research satellite. It had a back-channel data link, unused, forgotten, perfect. I made my way to an old observatory in Izmir. The dish barely moved, but the uplink still responded. I loaded the final build. Noise, cancelled, fork resistant, stripped of every ID. Just math and medicine, no signatures, no credits. I added one line to the header. Truth can't be owned. Then I transmitted. 93 seconds later, it was in orbit. Encrypted. Constant. Alive. I wiped the relay, destroyed the drive, and walked into the hills with nothing but a coat and a story that no one would ever print. Years passed. Governments scrubbed the records. Pharma companies quietly recaptured the narrative. Media moved on. But the cure never stopped. It lived in back rooms and clinics, passed in code, hidden in firmware, whispered between engineers and doctors who never gave interviews. In Nairobi, a medic used a dusty QR code to wean a child off insulin. In Bogota, an old pharmacologist found the treatment inside a damaged e-reader. In Kolkata, someone left a smartwatch broadcasting the protocol from a train station locker. They didn't know me. They didn't need to. I think about that sometimes, how all I did was notice something no one else did, just a glitch, a fragment. I could have ignored it, but I didn't. And that's all it took. Truth, once freed, doesn't go back in the vault. I was never the cure. I was just the signal,